the Jazz Symposium, and the Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. The operetta workshop was a summer program that was available to high school and college students here and in surrounding towns, where they could hone their choral and instrumental talents, which led to their professional careers in teaching and performing. Pam Murray at Harvard, our own Mary Bizzuti Higgins at the Opera Theater of St. Louis, and Chris Monteleone as the Phantom on Broadway. The Wilton High School Little Theater has been John Rhodes' incubator for developing dedicated students with amazing talents. And we are respectfully requesting that you honor John's contribution to our town and our school district by adding his name to a plaque outside the Little Theater doors to remind future students of his contribution in that space. I thank you. Yes.
Thank you very
And
much.
I have some folders to give to you.
You timed that very well, Mrs. Grape.
I've been practicing. I knew you would call me. I knew you would. So I've been practicing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. There may be other people who want to talk.
Hi.
Hello, my name is Brenda Freilich. I'm owner and director of Wilton Dance Studio, and I'm a long-term Wilton resident, presently living at 46 Pimpawog. I am 4th generation. My grandchildren are 6th generation Wiltonians. I feel so strongly about this. I'm doing something that terrifies me, and that is public speaking. Asked me to dance this,
Yeah.
got it. Thank you, all of you, for your long-standing service to the Wilton Board of Education. I, having grown through the schools, have personal experiences with John. I wouldn't be here if I didn't stand behind this man 100%. My husband and I would financially like to step forward if this plaque needs a financial backing to help make it happen. We are not here to challenge you or the 2016 policy. We are here to ask you to do the right thing for someone who has done the right thing for Wilton schools and the community for over 40 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, y'all. Kim Hall, Thayer Pond. I'm here as a proud parent of a current student who wanted me to come and share his letter with you personally. So he found out that this was afoot, and he was so excited by it and so delighted by it that he wrote a letter during his lunch hour, and he's a 14-year-old kid. We don't skip lunch in our house. So I thought that was a pretty strong endorsement. He wrote, I currently play tuba in concert band and am headed to wind ensemble next year, and I have Mr. Rhodes to thank for that. Through all of my years at Middlebrook, Mr. Rhodes was my band teacher and helped foster a love of music. Halfway through 7th grade, he offered me a chance to switch to playing the tuba, and I jumped at it. The other current freshman tubist and I worked with Mr. Rhodes to learn the instrument, and within a month we were providing a new lower sound to the band, immediately improving the overall sound. When we struggle, he always swoops in with his trombone and plays along with our part to help us understand what it should sound like. In how he approached teaching us to play the tuba, he showed that he cared about both the overall band and each individual musician. And that's not the only example of this. In 40 years of teaching here in Wilton, Mr. Rhodes has become a legend for everyone who's played in the band, and having the Little Theater renamed after him would provide a constant reminder of the energy and compassion he has brought to the band. Sincerely, Jack Hall, 9th grade.
Very nice. Thank you.
Hello, is it okay if I give you my stuff beforehand?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't make enough copies. I didn't really know how many
That's
people
okay.
were here.
Thank you.
I also have this.
Great, thanks so much. This is very
Hi, my name is Alexandra Curtin, and I'm a current senior at Wilton High School, and I live on Tamarack Place. So in the past 24 hours, the Wilton High School community has bonded together around our beloved teacher, Mrs. Kathleen Soderholm. And Mrs. Soderholm, although she's only been here for 3 years, for students has become an institution in the high school. She is a person that you can go to if you're feeling stressed. She is a person who has opened her arms to hundreds of students, as evidenced by these petitions I have set before you. One of these petitions, started by Jacob Pearl on change.org, has over 1,000 signatures, proving just how much the Wilton High School community loves and supports Mrs. Soderholm. Personally, I have been in 2 of her classes, and I can speak to just how amazing of a teacher she is. Not only is she does she lead the future business leaders of America, successfully, I might add. She helps them win numerous awards. She also spends so much of her free time after school just helping the children. So, one example, I took personal finance with her last year. And in that personal finance course, she made individual checkbook registers with our name, student ID, and the semester that we had, and the dates and everything. We had checkbooks, we had pay stubs, and she spent hours after school making these. And she doesn't have small classes either. She has a full schedule with students crammed into her classes, which I also think goes to show how much students love her. She also, for marketing, she took over the school store in an effort to help teach us, I'm in marketing right now, in an effort to help teach us about pricing and just product placement and sales and all those things. And I think that she would be sorely missed if she were to be let go at the end of this year. I believe that Kathleen Soderholm is one of the most wonderful teachers that Wilton High School has ever had. So, #Save Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Sam Gummins. I'm from Pine Ridge Road. I'm a Wilton parent. I was not aware that there was a 3-minute time limit, so I'm going to speak as quickly as I can to get 6 minutes down to 3. I've graduated 2 sons from the Wilton School District. I have a daughter who's currently a junior. All of them were heavily involved in the music program. All of them had the good fortune of taking classes from John Rhodes. I've actually personally been involved in the music program for the last 9 years. I've actually run the adjudication trip, so I firsthand have got to see Mr. Rhodes interacting with students outside the classroom, outside of concerts. I've seen him with students on buses, on dinner cruises, on dance floors, and amusement parks. I can tell you firsthand that the relationships that he has with students is very unique, very special, very meaningful. My sons heard I was coming to this meeting and asked if they could actually draft a letter for me to read here, given that that's the first letter they've ever written outside of a cell phone. I thought it was a wondrous event. And it really reflects on what they think about Mr. Rhodes and the contributions that he should be acknowledged, should be honored for. So I'd like to read a letter. Dear members of the Wilton Board of Education, our names are David and Drew Gummins. We're writing this letter today to honor and share our respect and admiration for John Rhodes. David, I first met Mr. Rhodes in 2006 when I was a 6th grade percussionist who kept forgetting to bring my drumsticks to class. From that day on, for the next 7 years, I was fortunate enough to learn from and experience the wisdom that is Mr. Rhodes. He is one of the very few teachers who crosses schools and directly impacts hundreds of students each day, from lowly 6th graders to seniors who think they're ready for college. On a personal level, Mr. Rhodes was one of those magical people who I knew I could always rely on and who I knew cared about me as a person well beyond my instrument. Wilton prides itself on its music program, and Mr. Rhodes is a huge part of that foundation. Though he may or may not have been around for the invention of music, he has certainly built and nurtured Wilton's music program from its inception. Our unique program inspires students and teaches skills, both musical and otherwise, that stay with students for years to come. I still reminisce with friends about stories from my time in band and recount lessons learned from Mr. Rhodes. From Drew, as a trombone player, I worked closely with Mr. Rhodes, and I will say that he was not only one of my favorite teachers, but also one of my favorite people. He truly is one of the best and longest-lasting faculty members of Wilton High School. Due to his hard work and countless hours, Mr. Rhodes has probably spent more time at the high school for band, jazz, sectionals, etc., than he has at his own house. He has shaped not only me and so many other students, but also parents, staff, and even the school itself. He truly is one of the greatest faculty members that has ever been through Wilton High School. Learning from Mr. Rhodes has meant the world to us. We know that we're but a few of the thousands of students he has impacted over his many, many, many years of dedication and teaching. He deserves nothing less than our utmost respect and our greatest appreciation. Thank you for your time and your recognition of Mr. Rhodes' contribution. David and Drew Gummins, I join my sons in hoping that the Board of Ed purposely honors Mr. Rhodes for his 44 decades of meaningful contribution to the Wilton school system, and I thank you for the time you've given me and my family at this meeting. Thank you.
Mr. Gummins.
Susan Bauerfeld, 45 Indian Hill Road. I think I will be well under 3 minutes. So John Rhodes is first and foremost a kind man of character who for 40 years has very quietly built inclusive, supportive communities in Wilton that have made a positive impact on the community as a whole. These communities have not only encouraged the pursuit of excellence, but have made it easier to pursue, even for those who struggled with pursuing it elsewhere. All this done quietly, selflessly, and without any fanfare. I encourage you to find a suitable public way to acknowledge and recognize the contribution of this humble, yet profoundly impactful community builder. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Brian McDonald. I've been a 27-year resident of the town of Wilton. My two daughters went entirely through the Wilton school system. Haley and Lizzie, they're graduates in the class of 2017. They participated in the band for all 4 years. My daughter Haley was a band officer. They were squad leaders, award winners. And I will just tell you, I would like to ask each and every one of you to think as a board and think as individuals in this community that there is no more deserving person to honor that I know of that has been through the school system and impacted my children than John Rhodes. John reached into the heart of my kids and pulled out a lifetime love of music. And that continues to this day. 48 hours ago, my daughter Haley called me from Penn State, and I believe a letter will be submitted from her. She was joining the concert band at Penn State, and she acknowledged John Rhodes was the reason she's doing this. He convinced her to move from alto sax to clarinet, and to bass clarinet. She'll be playing the bass clarinet next year in the Penn State concert band. That lifetime love of music, and I don't mean to minimize the importance of any other educators in our system, science or math or any other subject of study. Music is a lifetime. It's something they can do for their entire lives. And John has impacted more children over 42 years in our system, not just in the school system, but in this community. I truly can't imagine a more deserving person to honor in this way than John. It truly is remarkable of what music will do. I'm an example. At 58 years of age, I now sing in this town in 4 musical groups, 3 at the Wilton Congregational Church, and I'm a member of the Wilton Singers, where I have many of the music educators with me together in the Wilton Singers. I know what music means to my life and what it can mean to our children's lives, well beyond whatever they decide, what path they take in their lives. John Rhodes is the reason my children love music. And John Rhodes has done the same thing for thousands and thousands of kids. We've put Tom Fujitani's name on the football stadium, David Clune's name on the Art Center, and now, with the stroke of a check, we can put out Bankwell, Blue Buffalo. Think about the message we're sending to our children. If the way you get acknowledged and get your name up there is to simply write an economic check, rather than spend 42 years positively impacting the children in our town. I truly cannot ask this group to consider more seriously, and I realize there is a policy. Policies are there for guidance. There are times to make exceptions. This is a time to make an exception to any policy and any procedure that would prevent you from honoring John in the way of naming the Little Theater after him. So I encourage each and every one of you, not only as members of this board, members of the town of Wilton, and as individuals and persons, people of our town, to do the right thing and honor John in a way that I think is wholly appropriate and warranted and deserved. And again, there's no one more deserving for this award than John. Thank you very much for your time.
Resident.
I just have a few brief words regarding two of the teachers at the high school. I'm Andrew Kelso, and I live on Rivergate Drive.
Okay.
And
I'm Ryan Bibron. I'm a junior, and I'm at Scarlet Oak Drive.
Ryan, could you say your last name again?
Bibron,
Could you spell it?
B-I-B,
Oh, thank you.
E-R-O-N.
as a high school junior, I never would have imagined John Rhodes, the heart of the Warrior Band, to leave before I could graduate. His dedication to the high school and passion for helping students discover themselves with music has been enormous. I've had the pleasure of working with him in the marching band, ensemble, and jazz band, all of which he pours his everything into. Music is not just a skill for an individual to master without help. It is a conscious exercise in teamwork and synergy that, at its peak, can be matched by few other art forms. His contributions to the high school and students attending it more than warrant his commemoration and recognition from the Board of Education. I am glad I got to work with him the amount of time I did, and I wish him a peaceful and restful retirement. I only hope that others may feel the same way.
I'm Ryan, and I didn't come with a speech like he did, but I just wanted to say a few words about Mr. Rhodes. I've played the saxophone for about 6 years now, and every single one of those years, Mr. Rhodes has been there helping me and progressing me as a player, and I thought it was important that I come here because he's been with me my entire band career, and like not only as a teacher, he's really a friend to me. I mean, I can talk to him when I want to. Like, we'll just pick up small talk, and it's hard to find that with teachers. A lot of teachers, they just teach, but Mr. Rhodes is way more than a teacher, and I think it's extremely important that he's recognized for his 40 years of service. I mean, he's not asking for it, and he doesn't know that we're trying to do this, but I mean, I think it's well deserved that he does that, and I never was expecting to come support a teacher like this before, but for Mr. Rhodes, it's definitely worth it. And if there's one person I'd support that much, it's Mr. Rhodes.
And lastly, I'd like to talk about Kathy Soderholm. I would first and foremost like to say that I'm not out to ridicule any decisions made by staff, but I would just like to offer perspective. When I first began my high school career, I was overwhelmed. I was relatively new to the Wilton School District after moving to Wilton at the beginning of 2015, and I did not know what to make of my classes or how I should be involving myself in clubs and extracurriculars. Oftentimes, I would find my advisory period with Kathy Soderholm to be calming and reassuring. To this day, she's still the reason I don't want to ever miss advisory. In just that small amount of time each week, I feel like she's there for me as well as many other students in the high school. She cares about her students and is one of the few adults in the high school that most everyone can agree brings a special and inclusive atmosphere. She truly is a welcoming, positive attitude in the school, and I would not be as confident to speak about my feelings or opinions in a classroom or at the school if it were not for her. I hope you will consider how the students feel about her and our strong connection that we all share with her. Thank you.
I'm Pam Carlson, Apple Tree Lane, and I am the current VP of Music Boosters for band. I think this is a little longer than 3 minutes, so I'll edit as I go. As one of our seniors wrote in the Wilton Bulletin recently, there's that one teacher that stands out in the child's life for the first 18 years. And how that teacher touches lives in ways we don't even understand. I do know that John Rhodes has been that one teacher for countless of students over the last 40 plus years, for students who have excelled in academics and more importantly for those who have not excelled in academics. He has been the place, he has provided a meaningful place in this microcosm through the music department, and it has been his, and he has been the one to be that one teacher. Few teachers get that distinction in a lifetime, and he's done it year after year after year. When Mr. Chip Gall, another cornerstone of our music department, received his Grammy nomination a few years ago, in every speech he made, he gave John Rhodes credit for what he himself was able to achieve. Without John's introduction of every piece of music, part of the program with marching band, the collaboration with the cheerleaders and the football team, and his highly regarded and now copied jazz symposium at area schools like Darien and Norwalk, John Rhodes was the man. This is a sentiment echoed by many students today. He is the man. John has left a real legacy with the school and this town, and I believe he deserves a special recognition commensurate with his contributions. Would that we were all so lucky to have such a reputation, to have the chance to work with him or to have him as one of our teachers, to be that one teacher for each of us. It's quite a thing. Thank you.
Is that it? Nope. Okay.
And mine's well under 3 minutes. I'm Laura Fannin-Ploss, and I probably represent one of the oldest students in the room of John Rhodes. So I was graduate of Wilton High School in 1976 and met John then, took music theory with him, did not play in the band, but did theater and for the first time in my life did theater and have become a lifelong theater guru, I guess, or whatever at this point. But then my daughter also had John, and she graduated in 2013, and she played in the band, and it was pretty exciting for her to have a teacher that I had also and had great respect for. And I just, he made an impact in my life, and he made an impact in my daughter's life. And so I hope that there is a way to honor him for everything he's done. And I was here when he started 44 years ago or whatever, so that ages me. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Allison McHugh of Branchbrook Road. I'm just here as a parent to ask our Board of Education and Administration to please listen to our children. I don't know specifics, and I only know her from scheduling meetings at the high school, but what I know is Mrs. Soderholm is important to our children and your students. You tell us as parents at the 8th grade Moving Up presentation to make sure that our high schoolers have a teacher in the school who they feel safe with and can go to for anything. You need to know that Mrs. Soderholm is that safe place for many of our children. Please reconsider for our children keeping her as a part of this academic community that we in Wilton are so proud of. I would also like to show my support for Mr. Rhodes and renaming the little theater. He is the reason my children continue to participate in the music program here at Wilton High School. He's an important part of our school community, and he deserves the recognition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Mark Freilich. My wife and I have owned Wilton Dance Studio for almost 30 years here in town. I've lived in town since 1969. We now have 4 generations of my wife's family living in town. My wife and I both graduated Wilton High School. Our children graduated Wilton High School. I first met John Rhodes, I believe, when I was a member of the 5th grade band. And John, as Brian said, for his daughter, I was playing the clarinet, and John asked if I would please switch to the bass clarinet so that he could have one member that would play the bass clarinet. He worked on me for a long time, and I finally did. He's a special man, and he brings a special talent, and he brings a special feeling in music to these children. My daughter was in the band. She was in the marching band. She helped with choreography, and she helped with leading the dance teams for the band. And I think when she started, she was playing a viola. And then she played a piccolo, and then she played a flute, and then she played a French horn, and then she played a mellophone. All of which were encouraged and brought out of her by John Rhodes and Chip Gall. And Chip Gall was brought to us pretty much by John Rhodes. I can't think of any more fond memories, then I did the lighting for most of his musicals in the Little Theater. I met him, like I said, in 5th grade. I worked with him in Middlebrook, and I worked with him in the high school. I've known him for over 40 years. He's a wonderful man. He's a wonderful friend. He is an inspiration to thousands of children who are now adults, who are leading very, very productive lives as wonderful musicians and wonderful, productive people in their communities because of John. I can't think of a more deserving person than John to have this kind of distinction bestowed to him. I will echo what my wife said also. If there is any kind of financial consideration for this plaque, Wilton Dance Studio and Brenda and Mark are more than happy to pay for the plaque. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Rena Reichut of McFadden Drive, South Wilton. I'm just lending another voice of support in favor of putting a plaque up to honor John Rhodes. I have 2 boys who've been through the school system. My older one is a sophomore at his university studying computer science, and yet he refuses to let go of his trumpet and has a spot in the jazz band there, in large part because of John Rhodes. My younger son also just loves jazz and may not have had that experience had it not been for John Rhodes and Chip Gall. Not only did he impart his love of music to the children, but he also, his ability to read and connect with the kids is almost preternatural. He knew just when to push the kids and tap into strengths that he saw in them and they did not yet, and he knew when to just sit back and be a sounding board. He really is a special human being, and I would respectfully ask that you consider the plaque in his honor. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mary Bizzuti Higgins. I have lived in Wilton since 1968, and music has been a huge part of my life, as most of the town knows at this point. I'm just going to read, if you don't mind, an email that I had written to Martha Rhodes, John's wife, because there was such an overwhelming feeling to try to express how I feel about John Rhodes, who I have known for a great deal of my life. It's with great respect and deeply rooted memories and a wonderful lifelong friendship that I write to support the petition to honor the 50-year career in education of Mr. John Rhodes. It has been mentioned that there might be an opportunity to name the Wilton High School Little Theater for him in the same spirit that the Wilton community honors Dr. Clune, Chip Zellner, Nick Zioli, Charlene Peterson, Tom Fujitani, and of course the Taj Mahal for Chip Gall. I couldn't think of a more deserving or a gracious way to honor a man who has touched the lives of thousands of young and now grown musicians in such a profound way. It's not very often you hear of an educator willingly stay well past retirement age to ensure that a program continues to run smoothly amidst personnel changes. And that's what 50 years of care looks like. My own experience as a Wilton High School student from 76 to 1980 saw John Rhodes direct me in 8 fully staged productions of Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, both during school and each summer in between, all performed at the Little Theater. John Rhodes single-handedly directed the casts, prepared the orchestras, made up all his students, and conducted during each performance, and brought his special brand of magic as a teacher and musician to the Little Theater. And before these large-scale productions were performed, not many outside of Wilton ever really attended performances at our theater. But since John was a well-known genius in the genre of Gilbert and Sullivan, word spread quickly that his productions were the opportunity that young singers and musicians wanted to be part of. Each year the casts grew, and during the summer productions, young people from all over Fairfield County auditioned to perform in his shows. And these were all performed at the Wilton High School Little Theater, full-scale productions. I was also a student of his in music theory and composition in his classes during my high school tenure, and from that inspiration, I went on to major in music education and voice at Northwestern, and I earned 2 master's degrees at Boston University in opera and in voice. And it's been my high school years under his tutelage and mentorship that I propelled my career on that path. In 1995, I had the great fortune to work with John as a colleague here at Wilton High School. Well, I was the Wilton High School choral director while Patrick Taylor was on sabbatical. And I got to see firsthand how this gentle, quiet, brilliant, classy man worked behind the scenes to make the entire department rise to great heights and to a great reputation. That year, John Rhodes, Chip Gall, Marty Mead, Janet Nobles, and I worked as a cohesive team to ensure that the Wilton students from literally 5th grade on through 12th had the best music education that was specifically engineered to be a building block process leading up to a distinguished high school career for our musicians. This building block mentality and way of approaching a cohesive music program across the schools in the district was all John Rhodes' innovation, one that he instituted upon his arrival in Wilton. And of course, the marching band program he built from the...
Your time, can you wrap up?
Oh, yes. It's not easy to sum up a 50-year career of a man whose life crossed mine and a student for only 4. But in those 4 years, he managed to garner the respect of every student he touched and generously shared with us his love of music and theater, an educator in every sense of the word. Never heard him raise his voice, lose his cool. I will just go to the end, and I just think, to be honest, this man's demeanor is so wonderful. He's an unmistakable, remarkable, and extraordinary man, and I think the Little Theater should be named for him because it's the only way to honor a man who has spent 50 years shaping the lives of so many young people in Wilton. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. There will be another public comment period at the end of the meeting, so if you are so inclined.
Just give them a minute, sir.
Excuse me?
Some folks are exiting.
What? You don't want to stay?
I thought they came to see us.
You didn't come. Thank you all for coming. Consent agenda. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the consent agenda?
I'd like to make a motion that we remove the regular meeting minutes from the consent agenda and add them to the consent agenda at our next meeting because they're not available. They weren't on part of board docs.
Oh, okay. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we will remove the regular meeting minutes from the consent agenda and move those to the consent agenda of our next meeting. With that change, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the consent agenda is approved with that change. Thank you, Laura. Board chairs report. This week, the Board of Finance reduced our budget request by $500,000. The board initially voted to reduce our request by $650,000, but $150,000 was added back in after additional funds were found. A $500,000 reduction is easier to address than a $650,000 reduction, so we are grateful for that. It is nevertheless frustrating because the 2.24% spending request we submitted was very lean and did not include a penny more than we felt was necessary to fund our schools next year. But the reality is that we now must get behind this budget and work hard to ensure that it's passed by voters in May. There is almost a certain likelihood that efforts will be made to cut this budget further. Our town charter allows any resident to stand up at the town meeting and make a motion to cut our budget by any amount that person chooses. And if a majority of people attending the meeting that night think that's a good idea, then our budget will be reduced. Last year, there were 2 such motions, one to cut the budget by $1.5 million and another to cut it by $1.04 million. Fortunately, we had enough people, enough supporters of our schools in the audience that night to defeat those motions. Keep in mind that we asked for a 0% increase last year. We expect there will be challenges this year. What we don't know is if we can count on community support. So far, we've heard from a handful of people either way about our budget. Attendance at last week's public hearing was very poor, and I can count on my 2 hands the number of people who attended Dr. Smith's public budget presentation. So this is serious. Wilton has increased its school budget by an average 1.43% over the last 4 years, and this proposed 1.62% increase continues that trend. It's the lowest amount of investment of all of our neighboring districts. I really urge everyone right now to take out your calendar and mark Tuesday, May 1st at 7:30 PM in the Clune Center. And with that, I don't know if any of my board colleagues would like to give your thoughts on where we are with the budget, or anybody want to? Nobody?
Well, I want to say what you said
Okay.
already about public involvement being more critical than ever. I certainly understand the economic factors that were highlighted at the last Board of Finance meeting, and I think we're all sensitive to that. What I think was missing was not enough attention was paid to some of the points we had tried to make during the budget process. Dr. Smith had talked about the complexity of education these days and the changes that have been made, and pretending that that doesn't exist or doesn't need to happen, I think is being a little blind to reality for our kids these days. I was a lot disturbed about what seemed to be some questioning about whether we should be comparing ourselves to our reference groups that the state puts us with in terms of economics. I do think most people, when they're looking at schools in this area, compare ourselves to New Canaan, Darien, Westport, et cetera. And that is always the standard to which we've held ourselves to, if not even higher than that. So I was a little disturbed at a couple of comments that seemed to hint that we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to them. I also think there hasn't been enough attention paid or acknowledgement made for just how lean the budgets have been. To have an average budget of 43% in the last several years. You have to put that into context. So while a $500,000 reduction doesn't sound like a lot, it is a lot when you look back 4 years at 1.43 as an average. I think the scrubbing and the reducing and the trying to, nickel and dime and sort of a death by 1,000 cuts, Dr. Smith has done that in the last few years. So I'm worried about what this $500,000 reduction in our request will need to look like. I know we're going to do the best we can, and I know we're going to try to keep it as far away from kids as possible, and I know that we need to move forward, so we absolutely will do that. And like you said, Chris, that we are absolutely dependent on public support, so we don't become, looking at a crossroads. We want to maintain the quality and the excellence, and we need to plunge forward with a positive attitude, and we will do that. But I was certainly disappointed in this week's meeting.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. The superintendent?
Right, I have 3 items.
Yes.
I had 2, and then we had expansive public comment. And I think that's a great place to begin. In the busyness of budget planning and the busyness of managing a very complex organization, I think it's easy to lose sight of the kids we serve and the teachers who serve them. And I am so grateful for all of the folks who just took the last 25 minutes or so to express their thoughts about a really fine music teacher. And I think as we are thinking about the challenges we face in continuing to finance a world-class education system, we have to hold those thoughts in our minds, because this is what happens when financial pressures come to bear on school systems. The first things that tend to go are arts and music programs. And we have made a commitment over many years in this community to consider arts and music as part of the core program, and we have to continue to define core that way. Mm-hmm. And so I think, what a brilliant segue into some conversation about the budget and the financing, because those folks help us, I'll speak for me, help me to remember and to be reminded that this is absolutely, at its core, human work. And we have very fine human beings doing that work. And so I want to just thank them again. And to Susan, thanks for preparing these materials. I look forward to reviewing them. So that was number 1. Number 2, on the note of the reduction, we'll be working with the administrators. Ann and I began that conversation yesterday about how to address the reduction, and we'll return to the board with some recommendations to manage that. I want to just take a minute also and recognize, I want to thank the Board of Finance for their work, but also just recognize Peter Balderston and Richard Creeth, who have been serving on our Business Operations Committee. They've really had an opportunity, as I think you heard at the Board of Finance deliberations, the chance to dig in more deeply, and Richard in particular, for the time he spent at our workshops, where he really got to hear in great detail the work that the principals are doing in each of their buildings. The Business Operations Committee has been working for several months on trying to develop a set of metrics that would help the Board of Finance, help us, help the Board of Education, look comparatively across, not only our system, but also like systems, and try to compile a set of metrics that we could derive some meaning from that would help inform some of our decision making. So I want to just share some of that with you, if you don't mind, and kind of give you what my thinking is going forward. The committee proposed the following as a purpose and a rationale for the work. Long-term projected enrollment declines in the Wilton Public Schools, combined with chronic resource constraints in Wilton and the state of Connecticut, will require our schools to carefully manage year-over-year expenses while also evolving the curriculum to maintain excellence. Articulating these complex financial dynamics using relevant analytical and comparative or referential data to demonstrate to the Board of Ed, to the Board of Finance, to parents, to the electorate at large, that our schools are optimizing taxpayer dollars in pursuit of academic excellence is essential. While by no means the principal or exclusive way to judge the efficacy of a school district, the type of return on the educational dollar analysis is an important contextual exercise for both the annual budget cycle as well as tracking actual results versus the budget. So we had developed a couple of years ago, as you well know, a scorecard. And so I think this work around the metric development is a nice dovetail and complementary piece to that. It pulls some of our current metrics into it. So what the committee is looking at is a series of metrics that include demographics that we would try to capture year over year in 3-year and 10-year percentage changes. We'd look at the number of households with children in school, and what that number is as a percent of the total. Look at grand lists. Alongside that, tracking enrollment, per pupil expenditures, total educational expenditures, and a series of special education expenditures as well. And that's something that, after our last meeting, Andre was going to continue to refine a little bit so we could try to look beyond simply the total spending. We would track, as we already do, a variety of achievement measures, including the Connecticut Next Generation Accountability Index score, SAT scores, college acceptance, completion rates, et cetera. And then we would try to track some organizational comparisons, so staffing comparisons by type, by location. I think beyond that, the work would be to develop prioritized list of areas that we wanted develop deeper analyses. So, for example, that may include trends impacting special services spending. I think the next step is to finalize those metrics. I think we're probably 99% of the way there. We really need to just crystallize what additional special education metrics we want to include. And then I'd like to bring those before the board for some more formal discussion and approval at the end of the month. And then beyond that, we would propose to hire on a short-term contract an analyst to actually come and bring in and compile that. And talking with Ann, we have some money that we can do that with, and then kind of go forward from there. So I mean, Glenn or Deb.
Yeah, you're fine. That's good.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds great. Committee reports, business ops?
Well, Dr. Smith just gave a pretty significant recap of the efforts that are underway. So I really don't have anything to add to that. I think clearly we will begin to look at with the administration the impact of the Board of Finance's decision and where we can, how we can manage that. to say the least, it was disappointing, and that's really all I have to say.
Thank
We're done.
Debbie, do you have anything to add? Okay. Teaching and learning?
We met again today, reviewed a few things, but nothing significant to report tonight, and probably we'll have more to report next meeting.
Okay, and policy and communication, we didn't meet this week, meeting next, or
Okay.
following week, 2 weeks, yeah. Okay. The DMC report update.
Great, so we've had, as you know, much discussion about our DMC report that was commissioned and conducting a couple of years ago. We invited the president of District Management Group, Mr. Nathan Levinson, to join us tonight. So Nate's here,
Yeah.
and he's going to provide some of his own input and feedback on that report, and hopefully help us to manage some expectations.
Yeah, thank you for traveling to be here with us tonight.
Not my pleasure. Great, so what I thought I would do tonight, and that's glad to have a chance to share some thoughts and observations as I have watched through the press and through conversations over the last couple of years as the district has embraced and worked on the recommendations we shared. So I wanted to, I think I gotta start with the end in mind. And because everything flows back from this, and there's an interesting paradox, I guess is the easiest way to put it. We've done this kind of work with more than 100 school districts in more than 25 states. So we have, quite honestly, seen a lot over the last 10 years. And from our vantage point, we would, without a doubt, put the Wilton Public Schools in the upper third of districts that have embraced the report, working on the report, implementing the report, and by any internal measures we have, would say it's alive and well and doing what it was intended to do. Certainly, I know from what I've read in the papers, not everybody necessarily agrees with that. But I want to kind of share why and how we made that assessment, and perhaps help shed some light on why others might have made a different assessment as to how much progress has been made. The report laid out, and at its core, and our work has always been, first and foremost, how do you raise achievement and increase services and do more and better for your kids? And how do you do that in a way that is fair and reasonable for your staff, and to do it cost effectively? And unabashedly, we do believe that you can do more and better for kids, and it needn't cost more and often costs less. So let's put that out there. What I think has been perhaps lost is the timetable and the complexity is one piece that I think, but also what I'll call the span of control, kind of who gets to decide. Our sense is, and again, we've worked in more than 100 districts, more than 25 states. Every community over the last 20 to 30 years has created a set of norms on how you serve and support kids with special needs and kids who struggle. It is a fact that the same student, were they to move from one town to another, within a state, sometimes as few as a few miles away, or halfway across the country, where they land has a lot to do with how they're going to be served. Communities have built norms. We also see the same as absolutely true, for example, when it comes to class size. We do a lot of work in Minnesota. If you go to a district there, a highly affluent, love our children, love public education, high-performing school, starts with 29 kids in a kindergarten class and starts to think when it hits 32, they're getting big. You take those same parents and those same kids and you move them to Connecticut or Massachusetts, in that same kind of community, you would no more see 29 kids in a kindergarten class, and you would see a riot if you did. And I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I'm saying that norms develop over a very, very long period of time, and those norms become very powerful. What our report showed was, the Wilton Public Schools started in a place in which And if you kind of see the summary of many of our recommendations, that as kids struggled, special education was a primary go-to. That's where you go to get help. And when you get the help, it's going to be delivered in a certain way, a lot of it one-on-one, and a lot of it for most of your time in the school system. Our recommendation said there's a better way, better for kids and better for your budget, that said to intervene early, to provide supports outside of special education, to integrate social and emotional behavioral supports more deeply within the schools. And if you did all that, you would see you'd see more students getting help, but not as many necessarily through special education because you've intervened early and addressed their needs. And that's what we see happening in the district. I'll get specific in a minute, but I want to stress that it took 20-plus years, maybe 30 years, to get where you are, and it will take a very, very long time to get to where you might want to be. And this gets to what we call the span of controller, who gets to decide. And, you know, I've looked at this challenge from a lot of vantage points. I have been a superintendent. I have spent 6 years on a school board, and most of those as the fiscally conservative budget hawk/guru. So I have seen this from many sides. And one thing that's really important for folks to remember that school boards and school superintendents and special ed directors do not decide what services are going to provide to kids. Federal law took that away in 1976. Under federal and state rules, an IEP process, PPT process, teachers and special educators and parents sit down and say what's appropriate and what's needed. To be clear that in every community, that same student in different towns, the people sitting down will come up with a different plan. But that plan is based partially on the student's needs and a lot on how we have served kids with those needs over the last 20, 30 years. And if a superintendent or a board or special ed director says, hey, we want to do it differently, it's not their call. And what we have seen is, as districts have tried to shift to some of these practices where you intervene earlier, you intervene outside of special ed, you can't force it on a system. Nobody has that authority. The handful of places that have tried, often because there was a financial crisis or naivete and said we're just going to make those changes come hell or high water, the grievances, lawsuits, advocates come out in force. They always win because the law is on their side. And any perceived sense of trying to save some resources, you lose 10 times over. So this is a process that is possible. I mean, I'm an optimist, but it is very slow. It cannot be forced. It is not up to you as the board, and it is not actually up to the administrators either. It is a community, parent. You need everybody to agree. And what we've seen as one of the most effective ways to do this is to start not with the kids who've been in the system 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, whose parents, students, and teachers have said, this is the way we're going to help Nate. And then all of a sudden you come along and say, no, it's not. We're changing on you. A lot of parents who, again, they have, by law, have to agree to any of those changes, say, no, I like what you've been doing. So what we've seen as a more viable strategy is to start with kids who don't yet have IEPs, from preschool on, to say for new kids entering the system, we're going to build these supports. We're going to help them early and significantly, but we're going to do it in a new way, and that becomes the new norm. It's a thoughtful approach. It's an approach we certainly see the district doing. We've seen changes to preschool. We've seen a major emphasis on early literacy and We've seen an emphasis on intervention. This is a thoughtful approach. It is a slow approach. As an impatient person, yeah, I feel and can understand the frustration of like, why can't you just do this faster? But the truth is, you can't. The law doesn't allow it, the community seldom allows it, and trying to do it faster always backfires. You get more pushback, more expense, and you derail the effort. So we've seen, again, from our perspective looking in, outside perspective looking in, a thoughtful, steady progress, particularly focusing in the early grades, and that'll work itself up through the system. There are a couple other things we see underway that I think can help also to start building the kind of culture you want. I know there's an effort underway. Again, this is a good effort that has to be done slowly and methodically, about working with staff to think through collectively what's reasonable workload, how much time should be with students, how do we want to form groups. And I know that work is underway, and I think also in a very positive way. I think the last thing I want to make, or maybe just one or two more comments, making sure I've touched on my key points here. The other piece, and as a former school board member, 1.43% for the last 4 years. That is not much money. I mean, those are very tight budgets, and I think the work around special education in particular, people have to put in the context of, we see many school systems with special education costs rising at 5%, 7%, 8% a year over year after year. And we were seeing that because the needs of kids are changing. The world didn't stop. I mean, the financial world didn't get good for a lot of places, but the kids coming to school paid no attention to what the Wall Street Journal was printing. The number of kids with more significant disabilities, especially the number of kids with social, emotional, and behavioral challenges, anxiety, the pressure, both from kindergarten through graduating seniors. There's not a district we have worked with that hasn't had the pressure and often taken the steps, for example, to add social workers, counselors, some kind of support around that. One of the things that we had recommended and we've seen happen here is the district has been able to streamline some of the meetings and paperwork that some really talented staff, your school psychologists, were doing, paperwork they were doing, meetings they were attending. And as we've been able to streamline some of those tasks, they've been able to put more time into supporting students. So one of the things we've seen, and it's when you think about the metrics that your committee might be working on, one of the metrics we're a big fan of is for your staff that support students, how much time is going to supporting them? Because one of the things that we have seen, and I think it is happening here, is if you had 8 people and half their day went to supporting kids, and then 2 years later you have 8 people and 3/4 of their day is going to supporting kids, by any reasonable measure, you've added the equivalent of 2 full-time people supporting kids. That's a huge gain. As 2 people you didn't have to hire, that is a whole lot more kids you have helped. The problem is with the metrics most districts and boards have, is they say, I had 8 before, I have 8 now, nothing changed. Well, actually, there's a couple $100,000, $175,000, $180,000 of change. You're doing so much more with the folks you have and the dollars you have. It's our sense that a fair amount of that has taken place. And and I think an important metric as you try to evaluate the impact of the changes that have taken place. And I think the last thing I want to say, and I'm happy to take your questions, is I probably owe the community, and I haven't told the superintendent this, but probably owe him an apology as well. We have actually, not just because of the Wilton Public Schools, but in part because of what we've seen here, we have changed the way our reports are written. I think our reports, and we stand by every word in it, but haven't felt great about how folks, particularly outside the system, have interpreted some of what we've written. I think when we write and work with school districts, folks inside the system fully understand, because they've lived and breathed the complexity of special education, deep understanding of the legislation, and that, particularly this issue of span of control, who actually gets to decide. I think in a number of places, folks outside the district have read these reports and said, oh, this looks easy. Why don't they just, and you fill in the blank. And I always know, and again, I'm not a career educator. I spent the first half of my life in the private sector and the second half in the education sector. And I will tell you, in the first half of my life, I used the phrase, why don't they just, quite a bit. Public education, and particularly special education, is so much more complicated from the inside than it looks from the outside. And we have really revamped how we present our findings in a way that is more explicit about the pace of change and the complexity and the need for building very broad-based support for any changes that come. And I wish we had done that here, because I think there's been some misunderstanding of the complexities, not the direction and not the opportunities, but I think the complexities. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
This is 3 years now. We're almost at 3 years. And somewhere along the way, the magic number of $2 million was latched onto. And we've heard nothing but, where's the $2 million that DMC said you're going to save? And I'll go back to it again. At the back of your report, on page 29, it reads, Wilton Public Schools, the first suggestion, could repurpose approximately $575,000. It didn't say save, it said repurpose. It was by making doing the recommendations, making the changes, that portion of that cost that you spoke to very well. You still have 8 people, but they're doing much better work and much more work. You didn't save a penny, but you repurposed. The second group realized approximately $817,000 that could be used toward other initiatives. It doesn't say that you're going to pocket $800. You're going to take that money and you're going to put it to the initiatives spelled out in the report that are going to get you more efficient, providing better services to the students. Okay, it doesn't say save. We could free 410 in the third bullet point, and we could repurpose another 168,000 in the fourth bullet point. Nowhere does it say we're going to save $2 million. But somehow that got latched onto, we've heard it constantly. I don't know. People do not understand how complex this part of education is. I mean, it's mind-boggling, the complexities, and what you have to try and manage through to provide the services that we as a community, and as a board, and as a system have chosen to provide for these children. And he said, it's our decision to a certain degree. And it takes on the sense of the community and the purpose of the community and the direction and the principles that the community holds dear. And I don't know, it's just so frustrating because I watch the parents of these children. I watch Andrea, I watch the people in our special ed area committed to doing the right thing by these kids. And it doesn't come easy, and it doesn't come cheap. And to think that all of a sudden we're going to wave a magic wand and 2 years we're going to save $2 million, it just isn't going to happen. And I guess finally the other point, our cost in this area has been fairly static year over year over year for the past 4 or 5 years. I think we've done a really very good job of managing what we're doing in this area, providing a really high level of service to these kids the district that we were recommended to compare ourselves to by one of our Board of Finance members at the meeting on Tuesday night this coming year is looking at a 17% increase in their special ed costs. Ours are relatively flat year over year going forward. I don't know what to do. How do we solve the problem? How do we get people to understand what it takes? And are we efficient in doing it? I think we are. I think, yeah, are there opportunities? Absolutely. Are there ways we could change things and repurpose that money to continue to provide services and not save it, but use it better? I'm sure there are, but they don't come easy. It is a complex area of education, incredibly complex, with much of it out of our control.
Yeah, I think you make two really important points that I just want to echo and perhaps amplify. The first is this idea of shifting resources. I mean, our report was clear that you needed more interventions on the general education side. You needed to intervene earlier. You needed to integrate and expand social and emotional supports, and you were doing that. And that is part of the shifting. In districts that aren't making some of the headway you're doing, as they go to do those steps, because those are steps that are needed, they're increasing their spending by 10 and 15 and 20%. So the first is, and I do think it is consistent with what we wrote, is that we did not think that you needed more money to change and expand how you work with kids. And I think that's what you're doing. The second is, I don't have a great solution, but we're happy to help in any way we can. Trying to help people understand where the locus of control is. That boards and administrators don't write IEPs, and for the IEPs that have been written, you need the staff that you have. There's just a fact. And were you to, and this is where I talk about the foolhardiness of when districts, and I won't name them, but I can think of at least a couple in Connecticut, they said, oh, not working with us, I want to be very clear about that, but said, oh, we spend too much, or we're going to put a freeze on spending in special ed. We're not going to add staff, or we're going to reduce a few positions. The problem is you as a board or the community can make those changes. It doesn't change what was written in the IEPs. It doesn't change what's written in the next IEPs. And when those IEPs get written, you need the staff to deliver them. And when the staff is not there, you are out of compliance. You get fined. It is one of the most frustrating things in public education is that there's only one line item in your entire budget that is actually not controlled by school boards. I mean, if you wanted to put 29 kids in a classroom, you can. If you want to put 49 kids in a classroom, you can. And you do not have the authority to change what's in IEPs. And it frustrates people. And I think this is, again, a shortcoming of the report. For folks inside the district, never had to write that or think about writing that because everybody knows that. To your point, folks outside the district, it can be harder to understand that in 100 line items, 99 of them you all get to vote on, and on the 100th, you're going to spend what's in the IEPs one way or another. And that is complicated, and it is different.
Hi. First of all, thank you for your apology. I appreciate you acknowledging the situation that has been created here in the district as a result of the way in which the report was presented. So based on that, 2 questions. Can you briefly describe what you've learned from the Wilton experience and how you've revamped future reports? And then secondly, would you consider perhaps submitting to us a supplemental report in some way which takes into account what you have learned that you did right, or how you would present the data differently, so that we can then present that to our constituency to help them understand the situation as well? Sure. So two great questions. So the first is, what have we learned? What we have learned is, and I'm a financial person, I'm a numbers person, kind of right brain, left brain. We have learned that people tend to
grab a number and not all the sentences in and around it. As a result, honestly, we have vastly fewer financial forecasts in our reports. The numbers are there. We will provide the staffing ratios and such, but we have found that people seem to zero in on the number and not on everything that we said had to come with it and the complexities of it. So that's one thing that we've changed. Second is we're much more explicit about the need to go slow, the need to build broad-based support. Also, explicitly saying that most districts in a 3 to 5 year period will move on just 1 or 2 of the recommendations. So the idea that you could add up all of them is just, and again, I think when we were in person and sharing with the committees and the guiding coalition, we had this conversation. The voiceover was there, but clearly, if they weren't if people weren't in the room, and that's the point of a report, when folks said, okay, let's do all 6 and let's do it all fast, that isn't what we said, it isn't what we wrote, but I do think that's a very quick thing to do, so we don't make that easy anymore. And as far as producing some kind of supplement, yeah, we can talk to September, but we're certainly open to doing that. Certainly open to doing that.
Thank you for that. Several members of our Board of Finance are here tonight, and I thank each of you for coming out. The DMC report has been a focus of our budget negotiations, deliberations in each of the past 3 years. As recently as today, a Board of Finance member used the findings of the report to justify a call for cuts in our budget. The report includes very specific comparisons. For example, that the average 504 plan is 1% of enrollment nationwide, but in Wilton it's 5 times that. Our enrollment in our psychologist staffing is 10 to 5 or 2.6 nationally, but 10.5 in Wilton. Just really glaring numbers that have we've been clobbered with them as signs that we're inefficient and just ignoring. Look, it's right here, it's right here. Why won't you guys do this? What do we say to members of the community who say, we have this beautiful report and we didn't like what it said, so we're not doing it? Because that's what we're pretty much getting hit with.
So certainly my sense is that you've actually embraced the report and what we've seen working steadily and with energy and vigor to implement it. So again, we, without a doubt, put you in the category of people who have embraced it, working towards it, and are implementing it. We can say that in writing, we can say it tonight, we can say it to whomever you want, but we wholeheartedly believe that. I think the issue of having to explain, like the 504 is a perfect example. Yes, you do have a much higher than average 504 rate. That's a fact. The other fact is school leadership doesn't get to decide that. That is a community norm that was built over 20 or 30 years. In many districts, nobody ever thought of a 504. When we were in districts where literally there's 0.5% of kids have a 504, some that are even lower. And those are the same kids you have. It is a community, and it has nothing to do with affluence. It is a community that never hit on that as a route to support struggling students. As a community, and I'm fairly confident it took 20 or 30 years to get there, parents and the community as a whole said, hey, if a student looks like this and struggles like this, we want a 504, and we're gonna provide 504s in response. You don't have the authority to say we're gonna stop doing that. And you don't have, and again, in a handful of places that have tried to just do that unilaterally, it has been a nightmare, both from a relationship with the community and a financial nightmare as well. What you can do, and what we see the district doing, is people resort to special education and 504 because that was a path to get something. What we see the district doing is building out its social and emotional supports and building out intervention in reading and early intervention that says, hey, my son or daughter is struggling, we're going to go help right away. No meeting required, no 504 required, no request for an IEP required. And that's the right thing to do. We see it underway. And what you should see over time is fewer parents asking for 504 and fewer referrals to special education. And that will allow you over time, as these kids get served through general education. So to one part, you are going to have shifted some resources to provide those services. That is a more effective and a more cost-effective way to provide those services. It's better for kids and better for the budget. And over the long haul, you will be able to see fewer kids in special education, and your costs and staffing will come down over time. But you've got to first shift, and second build, and third meet those needs, and then it works its way through the system. As a very long process, and as I said, I can feel and empathize with people who want it to go faster, but it just doesn't. Not here and not anywhere else. And I empathize with your frustration, but also understand theirs if they've never really been through this or understand how the law works.
Sure. Just to that question.
Okay, thank you.
So, sorry.
We just want to make sure all the questions
Yep.
are coming out.
Yep, no, that's fine.
Being
And I know
redundant.
and if you want, I'm happy to.
I think, if other people have questions, he's got 4 or 5 questions that were sent to me earlier this afternoon.
From Board of Finance members, can we have them addressed?
Yeah, I think as soon as you're all done with
Yeah,
your questions.
any other questions from?
Well, I guess my question would be going to the layers of complexity, that I might understand that reading issues that would later get addressed as special ed hopefully would not be necessary if you intervene early.
Yep.
Perhaps that might be the case on social emotional, maybe some of the issues, but there are legal definitions of a student who qualifies for a classification. So I'm trying to figure out, would those kids or those parents or those teachers or those administrators ever want a kid not to? You know what I mean? If you legally qualify, meet the profile, and I know sometimes that's debated about whether we are too lenient or too not lenient on that issue, but there's still sort of students who definitely. So. What are you suggesting then?
So this is about moderation. I mean, nothing is black. You will have special education next year and 40 years from now, and you should. And you will have some kids with 504s next year and 40 years from now. The question is really the balance. What we've seen here and elsewhere is when parents don't feel, or there aren't quick and automatic supports in place, people seek guarantees. I mean, the nice thing about an IEP, notwithstanding the law and such, it's a guarantee. And 504s bring a lot of protection as well. So what we have seen, to your point, is cultures change over time, where when there are significant supports in place that don't require an IEP or a 504, some parents will say, those automatic supports are great and sufficient, and others will say they're not. And I think you want to be able to and have to address both of those. I think the issue of social emotional behavioral supports is a classic one. Up until very recently, quite honestly, having an IEP opened you access to vastly more supports in this area in many districts across the country. But we know that upwards of half of the kids who want and need these kind of supports probably do not have a disability. They have a need. So we're seeing far more school systems trying to provide these kind of supports, both to kids with disabilities and without. And what you just want to take off the table is this, we're not trying to shut people out of special ed. What we're trying to do is create a path that says, it shouldn't be the only ticket to support. And our sense was that only is probably too strong, but there was a lot of pressure and a lot of reasonable pressure to either get a 504 or an IEP, because that unlocked far more services than if I didn't. And our recommendations are to shift some, but not all, of your services and resources to helping kids who don't have 504s and who don't have IEPs. And I think you'll create a better balance and help kids quicker. And again, all of this, and you just can't stress enough, this has to be done with the support of parents. So so some will want one route and some will want another, because that's what's going to be most appropriate for their kids. But we're not trying to shut down any path.
No.
Trying to open up some
No.
more paths.
Yeah, I get that. Okay.
I'm not sure this is a question, but it's something I've been giving a lot of thought to, because a lot of people in the community, there's this overwhelming belief that people are gaming the system, and the reason why we have 11th graders asking for accommodations is so they can help them get into college. And listening to you and thinking about that, the 504 number, and we were talking today about Middlebrook. We have a team set up at Middlebrook, and the kids are on teams. There are a lot of teachers who see them every day, and then you get to the high school, they don't have that support, and there's inconsistencies. I'd like to think that every teacher was perfect, but like as the child is moving from gym to geometry to physics to AP Lang even, that not everything's getting followed, not everything's getting noticed. And so so maybe this isn't a question, but it seems to me that if we do have this cultural, this town norm of going to a 504, not because a parent wants their child to get extra time at a test, but just to make sure that the child, if they have anxiety, or if they have Lyme disease, or if they broke their leg, or received a concussion playing football, that there's a consistency as they move from class to class, and a 504 would encompass that, and that would be something, a guideline for, this is just me talking, it's not, based on anything, but that sounds to me that that's a plausible scenario at Wilton High School. And I'm just frustrated. I've never met a parent who has tried to get a 504 for any reason except for their child's needs aren't getting met, and that they can't go to school, and they can't do the things that other children are doing. And I guess I never thought I was lucky that all the parents I know whose children have IEPs and 504s genuinely have children. Their children have issues and problems and diagnoses. They work really hard, and they want what's best for their child. I think the high school administration, I think the people standing behind you want what's best for the children, the people who lead our schools, and parents. And, and I just, it's just an uphill battle that people are attacking people this way. And I am discouraged, especially because at the end of the day, we're talking about a child, we're talking about a lot of children who are trying to do the best they can, and that people are discrediting them or accusing their parents of things. It doesn't serve our schools well, it doesn't serve the classroom well, it doesn't serve our teachers well. And so thank you for some of your insights, because it's helped me make sense of things.
Are there any other questions from our board?
Great. So I provided Nate, just before the meeting, a handful of questions that came in from some members of the Board of Finance. So Nate, if you
Great,
wouldn't
so
mind,
I'm
thank you.
going to take them in slightly different order, but I'll touch on all of them. So one question was, the recommendations in the DMC report were well researched and documented, and provided specific steps to achieve the estimated savings set forth in the report. That was a statement. Question 1 was, do you believe that these recommendations are still valid? So I think the first thing I would respond to is we actually talked about in the report shifting resources, as was pointed out, that there were places that you needed to invest. All these kind of general education supports, these things that come before special ed, and to expand and integrate the social emotion behavioral. So I think it's somewhat of a misstatement of what we wrote. I do believe that the recommendations are correct and valid, and we would write them again, but we would also write them differently to be really clear that you cannot do all of them. We would, I mean, if somebody said and I know we've talked about this when we presented the report, if somebody said we want to do all 6 of them, I mean, the first thing we would have said is you're crazy. I mean, a line that I've used when we first remember sitting with the guiding coalition, we said if any of this stuff was easy, you had already done it, and we wouldn't be here. There's nothing in this report that is simple. Generally, districts tackle 1 or 2 of the things over 3 to 5 years. So, yes, these are the right options. You can't do them all, and they're going to go slowly. And then the second question was, if so, how should these changes be implemented? And I think I've touched on that. Is it has to be done in partnership with parents. It generally is done by starting in preschool and working your way up, early intervention and early elementary, and really trying to roll these out with kids who are not yet in the special ed system. I think it's also, creating some guidelines around staffing, again, in partnership with staff, and rolling those out slowly also helped quite a bit. And I think particularly given, and I think this is one comment I meant to make and didn't, is, and I get, from the outside looking in, again, going back to that example, if you had 8 of something today and 8 tomorrow, and it's easy to look and say, whoa, you've done nothing. As a former superintendent, and somebody who's worked a lot in this field, 8 today and 8 tomorrow can be it could be you've done nothing. Or it can be you've increased support to kids by 25% and didn't hire 2 people that you really, really needed. Those are like night and day differences. My sense, and from what I've seen and heard, is your example number 2. You're being able to provide much more support. You didn't have to hire additional people to provide that support, and that's a real victory. And I think there's optics hard to see that, but it doesn't mean it isn't there. So I think the way you are going about implementing it is what we would recommend. That was one question. The DMC report published in June of 2015 focused on the dramatic growth in Wilton's Special Education Department and outlined approximately $1.95 million in achievable savings from that department. Approximately 10% of the estimated savings was implemented in the FY 2000 budget, but since then, our Wilton Public Schools superintendent has offered a number of reasons why the remainder of the savings will be slow to materialize or altogether unachievable. A major reason being that Wilton is different than other school districts of similar socioeconomic makeup. Can I have your reactions to that position? Again, we never said you could get all of the savings. First of all, you can't do all of them. It's 1 or 2. We said you can shift the resources to do more and better. The fact that you have slowed and have relatively flat growth in special ed spending puts you in the upper reaches of where districts want to be. Lots of places, even in Astoria, it's a much larger district, but it gives you a sense of the pressures on growing special education. A superintendent friend of mine called me to tell me, this was a few years ago, large district, they were about to RIF 465 teachers. I said, whoa, obviously dramatic. She said, well, what's really even more uncomfortable, that all 465 were general ed, we're adding 38 special educators at the same time. This is a district that went through possibly the most draconian cuts I have seen firsthand. That this rippled through every classroom and every school. They were in crisis mode. The state had cut funding dramatically, and yet they have no control. The needs and the IEPs dictated a reasonably substantial increase in special education staffing and spending. That's the world we live in. And I'm not trying to blame anybody, it's just trying to get people to understand that there's most of the budget you can decide what to do, and there's a portion of it that you don't. And I think this issue of is Wilton different? I would say that you are different and similar as follows. Every district we've ever worked with has a cultural norm. And moving from that cultural norm is slow and difficult. Your norm built up over many years happens to be the way you write IEPs and the expectations for 504s. It's very interesting, at least interesting to geeks like me, when we go into a district that is very low staffing, and we will ask them, how is it that you're, below the 50th percentile? How is it that, what was it that, how did you lead this big reduction? How do you run so lean? In every case, we hear the following: are we? We could use a few more people, but this is the way we've always done it. It is not, it is not a master plan. It is how things developed over 20 or 30 years. And what we're seeing, and I think the Wilton Public Schools is seeing, as the financial pressures have gotten greater, and when these are times unlike most of the last 100 years in public education, as the financial pressures have gotten so much greater, people are starting to say, and I actually commend the district, saying, we should look at this. And what we've come back to tell you is, yeah, your cultural norms and the way IEPs are written and 504s are expected is you require the staff you have. And what we see is a leadership team thoughtfully and methodically trying to shift that. And you will get there, but not as fast as people like, and but nobody else is getting there any faster. The other question was, do any of these measures take more than 2 years to implement? Absolutely. They just do. The last question, which is beyond the scope of the report, but happy to answer, is most school districts in the country, including Wilton, face declining enrollments for the foreseeable future. Based on your firm's research, what are the top 3 or 4 areas of cost savings opportunities for school districts to face the challenge head on? We work with a lot of school systems that have declining enrollment. And the way we've typically recommended, and I think a very healthy way for a board and a finance committee to manage, is to look at your budget in a couple different ways, and not in a way they're typically listed in a line item. There are a number of costs that should align to enrollment. So we've seen where you're going to say, elementary classroom and high school classroom staffing. As enrollment drifts down, you should see those kind of staffing drift down, acknowledging that it is a step function. Like it never works 2.2% down in enrollment, 2.2% down in staffing costs. But that over time you should see those costs, which can be easily identified, that should track with enrollment. But then, and this is where I think it helps folks outside the system a lot, you really want to be tracking head count. Because I used, and I misspoke, so I've contributed to your problem again, that the costs should track down. But no, people's costs go up. So if you, and this is, if you lost 1% of your kids, and if your head count went down by 1%, your budget's going up by 3. I mean, just generally speaking, if you look at virtually every collective bargaining agreement in the United States, teachers get paid more as they're longer in the system. They get paid more as they get more degrees. Your healthcare costs don't go down just because you had fewer kids. So what we've seen, and it really helps people to say, these are some costs, but they're not costs, they're head count that you should be able to manage. One valuable measure is what's the average class size for a school? Not grade by grade, but an average class size for a school. And if that's holding relatively constant, it means you are relatively reducing the head count proportionally. But then you've got to be able to show people, so yes, our head count did come down, but the cost of each head went up, because that is the way it works in this country. The second thing that you want to kind of show people is, on top of that, we have another set of costs that have nothing to do with the number of kids. Utilities. Costs the same to heat a school whether 3 kids come to school or 300. The same happens to be true with custodial, and there's a whole bunch of other costs that just don't track with enrollment. So people shouldn't be expecting those to be tracking down. And then lastly, you've got, the third is things like special education that don't track to enrollment. And this is that longer discussion we've already had. And then I think the fourth is what I'll call growth in services. The world doesn't stop. And again, the kids coming to school have greater needs. And whether you have 27 fewer kids next year, I am fairly confident you will have more than 30 kids who have some social and emotional challenges, and you're going to want to meet those needs. And you may decide you want to expand your STEM offerings, because lots of people are doing that. That's going to be an addition too. So what I've seen is having great clarity and agreement as to which are the things that should track with enrollment. And it tends to be head count, not dollars, because the dollars don't actually track. And it's head count in certain areas. And then I think it's reasonable for people to ask you as a board, have you made over time the decrease in those areas that should be? And others need to understand that there are other parts of your budget that have no correlation to your enrollment. And lastly, as a community, people should be saying, and we do want to increase our STEM offerings or expand to this seemingly amazing music and drama that you have, and do other new things. And I think what happens sometimes is they all get conflated. They all kind of get thrown into a pot and stirred around, and you can't see one from the other. And I don't think that helps the conversation. I think it makes it hard for people to see that you may have been managing very, very thoughtfully, but there are ups and downs in different parts of your budget.
Are there any other questions?
Great. Nate, thank you very much. I
Yeah,
really
thank
appreciate you
you.
making the trip. And
You're very welcome, and again, if we can continue to help you clarify what we've done and opine on what you're doing, it's certainly our pleasure and our commitment to help you, because, as I said, from our perspective, you're doing the right stuff at about the right pace.
That's very helpful to hear.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nate.
Thank you again.
Thank you very well.
We move on to action items. First up is to discuss and approve the Wilton High School graduation date.
do you have a recommendation, Dr. O'Donnell?
We do. We'd like to graduate this graduating class on June 3rd, Dr. Smith. And we had our first graduation meeting with the students on Wednesday. They're excited. We've got some good student leadership behind the planning, and we'll be ready to honor them.
Excellent.
Let's hope the weather cooperates, right?
There's snow.
Is there a motion to approve June 23rd as Wilton High School graduation?
I move that we approve June 23rd as Wilton High School's graduation.
Is there a
I'll second.
Second?
Second.
Discussion, right, discussion.
Any discussion?
Question, so what does that mean for seniors as far as the days that go beyond graduation day, the
We're
school
working through
days?
that right now.
Dr. Smith and I are waiting for a little bit more information from an outside source, and then we'll be ready to report out on that.
Sounds right.
I just want to throw in there, like in the old days, that they couldn't wait to get rid of the seniors, and we graduated probably 2 weeks before the rest of the school finished, so.
So some learning can get done.
Yeah, exactly. Get the seniors out
Should
of
get a move-up
it.
day for the juniors, right?
Anything else? Okay, all in favor of June 23rd as graduation date?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? June 23rd it is.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Discuss and approve Town of Wilton bonded capital.
The 5-year bonded capital plan before you is a plan that the facilities director, Chris Burney, and the superintendent have worked together in regards to meshing both the operating capital plan that we have and the bonded capital plan. So in total, over the next 5 years, they're looking at $4.9 million. The first, for the public, just so you know, the first one is the district roof replacements. These are the ones that are in need and what we need to do with it. The studies, there was a previous bonding for that, a smaller amount, to start the study and the engineering part of it. So that's in the work. So that's gonna be, a lot of this work obviously has to be done over the summer. So this is why a lot of these have been planned over a couple of different years on it. Cider Mill, there's a repaving parking lot on that. That's next year. But as you can see, the one that is in this year's 2019 is the bus barn repaving and adding lights in that area. So if you've been up at the bus barn, you will know that they've done a lot of patching, and obviously with all the snow and the ice that we've been having, it's done a lot more damage. So that is an immediate need that we need to take care of in this year. So that is the one for this year. After that, we have the Middlebrook and Cider Mill HVAC replacement. You'll see in 2020, we put in $100. Again, that's the engineering, the study, what needs to be done, and the plan out for it to moving forward. So there's a lot of, I actually like this plan, the way they developed it, because we've developed it over the time period of where the need is. And obviously, this will move if something else comes up. And something else could come up tomorrow that isn't on this 5-year, we're gonna have to add it on at some point. But this is a really good thought out, on top of doing the operating capital, to make sure the things that we need to do with that coincide with this and not disrupt it. Because we have to do a lot of the work during the summer. So we've, between Chris Burney, Jose, been working with those plans. So I'm looking to get approval of it.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Certainly, I believe the needs and the timeline, but a little question about the timeline. The total dollars bump around a little bit, 400 one year, 1.2 million the next year. Is that okay, or is it better to try to even it out so it's more?
It's dependent on the jobs that we think we can get done at that time period. So, and I should also explain, this is for the authorization for the project, it's not when we borrow the money. So that's two different things, because sometimes people we just borrowed now for projects we started last year, so that's what we do. But these are put in this order in regards to what work can we do during what summer periods, or if there's breaks. And the level that the scope, the scope of what they're looking at, what can we get done, and which school has the bigger need. So there could be a different dollar amount based on the need of that school.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, for instance, like repaving the Cider Mill parking lot. It's just, does it matter to any budget that one year that this group will be $400,000 and the next year will be $1.2 million?
I see what you're saying. No.
When maybe it's better to have just a more even amount. That's all I'm asking.
This is different because it's a bonded one. It's a different program. So when I go out to bond, we look at the program. So something like this, where it's the bus barn, or something that might have a 10-year life, we amortize it over 10 years. Something like the roof replacements, it's amortized over probably 20 years.
Okay.
So and this budget is on the town side from the debt service. So this will all roll into the debt service and set up as
all right,
yeah.
All right, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, the only thing that, I brought this up, I can't, honestly, I can't remember when, maybe it was at our business ops meeting.
Floor?
Is
We talked about it.
We talked, yeah.
We need to get that looked at the field house floor. Somebody to come in and take a hard look at it. because I don't want that to pop up and surprise us, because it's gonna be a very costly. That fieldhouse floor has got to be 25 years old, 20 years old. We've been in town 15 years, and it was here when we moved here, so it's gotta be 20 years old. And I don't know what the life expectancy is. There are some obvious cracks beginning to occur underneath. You can see they're visible in the surface of the floor, so I think it's something we need to get looked at and be prepared to add to this. And I don't know what the process we're doing that would be, but I want to get that on record.
It's on, we put that in front of Jose and Chris.
Yeah, it is in front of them, and as you know, just so the public knows too, Chris is an engineer, so a lot of these things he's looking at from a structural basis, as well as repair. So it is on his list of looking at the
Okay.
priorities.
All right.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the bonded capital plan?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Discuss and approve the 2018-19 district calendar, which includes the changes that were discussed at our last meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
I have a, yes, but we're gonna discuss it,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion?
These reflect the changes you recommended.
They
You
do.
said you were gonna get more input, but it was consistent with what you had proposed.
Oh, this is
Meeting
exactly what I
week.
proposed,
Yeah.
yeah, and so we
Okay.
put it out, we put it in front of the membership of the WEA through a survey, and
Okay, so,
it came back,
so the input was.
60-40, yeah.
All right,
Good.
fine.
Mhm.
And then my other question is, are we doing this with the understanding that as we look forward, we consider Labor Day, whether to start before or after?
Yeah, I think, we talked about this in my comments a week ago, but my intention is to roll the start date back to prior to Labor Day, beginning in 1920. There were a series of variables that got in the way that made this impossible for 1819.
Okay.
Can you just explain, just in general, because I think a few people are probably hopeful if we're voting on the calendar now, why we can't have it start, just to make it clear to everybody?
So I think, I can go back and find my notes. One of the challenges we had was just, in this calendar, we had already moved two of the professional learning days to August prior to Labor Day. So that just squeezes that week. We also have the student school schedules that are worked on all summer, and the feedback that we got from our IT folks was that pushing up that timeline would make it very difficult for them. The third piece of feedback we got is that some families had kind of taken a look at this calendar and planned vacations. In fact, I just got a note this week for that, I guess that last week of August there. And, you know, all those things combined, we're not trying to inconvenience people anymore. And I think, you know, for my own part, we really try hard to publish these, you know, a year in advance at least, so people can make plans. And, you know, it's already, you know, April, looking at September, so we're pretty late to the game, and for good reason, you know, with all of the cancellations. So to me, the accommodation was, you know, the changes that are proposed here, make the change around Columbus Day, take the day back, you know, that we had added in the previously approved calendar to February, and then, you know, get the calendar we actually want going forward in 1920.
Anything else? Okay, all in favor of the 2018-19 district calendar as amended?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, these changes are approved, thank you.
We need to pull hate-based, because I didn't,
We
that
should
shouldn't
have,
have been on
yeah,
there.
you know, how do we handle that?
I
Just table
move
it.
that we remove number 4, discuss and approve the hate-based conduct.
Yeah, and the reason, is there a second?
Second.
Yeah, the reason we're doing that is because in our discussions last week, some comments were made and recommendations raised, and because the policy committee didn't meet this week, weren't able to incorporate those, so that will be back on with the recommended changes at our next board meeting. Okay? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the hate-based conduct policy is removed until the next meeting. Policy 6153-1, field trips and other extensions of classroom instructional activities. Again, this was as discussed at our last meeting. Is there a motion to approve? Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. As we do with every meeting, we have the opportunity for members of the public to come and offer any opinions. Would anyone like to come forward at this time? Come on up. Please come up. Have at it.
Necessarily what y'all were talking about?
You have the floor for
Okay.
3 minutes.
All right, well.
And say your name and.
Martha Outlaw, and address 10 Keeler's Ridge. First of all, I want to congratulate y'all on finally being able to bring the Wilton community together on a school discussion. I'm here to talk about Kathy Soderholm. In my experience, well, I don't know all the teachers, obviously. I just know the ones that my kids and their close friends have had. But there's 3 that consistently stand out from their experience and also from what they say and what they've learned. And that's Bray, Harvey, and Soderholm. So, I'm sure you've seen a lot of the letters and you'll be getting a lot more because this is a really recent development. But, I think that you'll see that across the board, the students, the parents, all ages, all, boys, girls, everybody. I've been so impressed with the letters and how articulate the kids are and how close they are to her. I mean, it's just rare to have, you just don't get that experience that often with a teacher, I don't think. And you're really lucky when you do. So I'm trying to understand, and I know this is new, and I have no information other than I heard it was on the table. But I'm trying to understand, how the decision was made, in light of what is her apparent effectiveness and relationship. And so, I was trying to think, is it money? Well, if it is, I don't really understand that. I know we're always on a budget crunch, but unless you're going to drop the classes that she has, and I assume that she doesn't make that much more than other teachers. And to be honest, I can tell you a few other teachers that I would be happy to lose their salary on. No offense to teachers. But, and I think you would also get agreement on that. So when you look at that comparison, you're like, okay, there's a few teachers where you're like, how are they still here? And if they were gone, nobody would say, big surprise. And I know there's reasons, there's tenure and stuff like that. And then somebody like Kathy, it's kind of shocking. So I can't believe it's the money thing. And then I've heard some comments that maybe it was based on unprofessional behavior. Well, what makes a professional teacher? Somebody who teaches the kids, somebody who the children trust, and they come out of her class or his class better, and they learn the material. And, so if you use that as a basis for a professional teacher,
We're just watching the clock.
Oh, sorry. Okay, last thing is, I have two thoughts on this. If her value wasn't recognized by the administration, if people didn't recognize, and this was a big surprise, the relationship and the feedback that you got, then that's an issue. If it was recognized and this still came up, the decision was made, then that's an issue, unless there's definitely something that we don't know. So I am here to urge you to reconsider this, and if it does happen, I think we're lucky to have her. And if it does happen, then, I know there's only so much you can say, but expect the community to need some rationale. So, thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who would like to come forward? Seeing no one, okay. Is there a motion to adjourn? Right, wait, right, yeah, motion to adjourn? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Next meeting of the Board of Education will be Thursday, April 26th. Have a safe and restful break. Would you like us to go back into?
You were just there last weekend.
Yeah, sure.
Years, my